On September 27, 1981, one of the most unsettling cases of family isolation and inbreeding ever recorded in the United States was brought to light in Owsley County, Kentucky. Nestled deep within the Appalachians, Owsley was already recognized as one of America's most impoverished counties, a place where families had lived for generations in secluded valleys, cut off from the outside world by imposing mountains and roads that turned impassable during the severe winters. That particular day, amid a light drizzle that veiled the mountains in a thick mist, a state social services team was performing routine checks on unregistered dwellings. It was then they stumbled upon a dilapidated house in the area called La Rose. The property sat nearly 5 miles from the nearest main road, reachable only by a dirt trail that snaked through pine forests and ancient oaks. What they discovered would permanently alter the quiet history of that valley. The home, a wooden structure darkened by age, had no proper windows, just openings blocked with pieces of plastic and cardboard. The roof showed clear holes, and the yard was conquered by tall weeds and rust. The first thing that struck the social workers was the strange, heavy silence. Even on the most remote properties, you'd usually hear something: chickens, an old radio, people talking. Here, the silence felt like a living presence. Upon knocking, they were met by an elderly woman, later identified as 72-year-old Martha Branham. She attempted to block the team from entering, but the powerful smell coming from inside, combined with her visibly frail condition, warranted immediate action. Inside that house, which had no electricity or running water, lived 6 individuals: Martha, her daughter Eloise Branham, aged 49, and 4 younger women who were identified as Eloise's daughters. These 4 women, roughly between 18 and 30 years old, displayed alarming physical traits. Their faces were asymmetrical, they had severe strabismus, prominent jawlines, and most notably, a clear struggle with communication. None of them could speak clearly, only making guttural sounds and basic phrases that seemed to make sense solely to them. The scene left a mark on even the most seasoned social workers. In their official reports, they described the women moving through the space like specters, seemingly not fully aware of our presence. Their motions were uncoordinated, and each exhibited repetitive behaviors, like rocking back and forth without pause. Most alarming was the complete lack of any official records. None of the 4 women possessed a birth certificate, school record, or any form of documentation. It was as if they didn't exist to the world beyond those walls. This case would merely be the starting point of uncovering a history of inbreeding that spanned decades, an invisible cycle of isolation, abuse, and neglect that resulted in one of the starkest examples of the devastating impact of sustained family interbreeding. As authorities struggled to comprehend what they were witnessing, the 4 sisters Agnes, Mary, Louise, and Catherine, names given to them later since they had no official identities, remained seated on the bare floor, as if this interruption was just a minor disturbance in a lifetime of silence. The real story of these women, however, had started much earlier, in a different era of Kentucky, where geographical and cultural isolation created the perfect conditions for a family to turn inward upon itself for generations. If you want to follow more investigations like this, the kind that shake societies and reveal hidden truths, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing. Following the initial discovery, county officials were confronted with an unprecedented challenge: how to investigate a situation where there were virtually no records, outside witnesses, or formal documents. The 4 women were quickly transported to Cumberland Valley Regional Hospital for medical assessment, while Eloise and Martha were taken into custody. The first medical reports, dated September 30, 1981, painted an alarming picture. The 4 sisters exhibited a range of physical and cognitive traits consistent with what doctors of the time referred to as degeneration from inbreeding. Dr. Robert Harkins, leading the medical team, noted in his confidential report, "We are dealing with a case where family endogamy appears to have occurred over multiple generations, leading to the classic signs of accumulated recessive disorders." The investigation into the family's past encountered major hurdles from the start. Martha Branham would not cooperate, insisting that family business was private. The scant information she offered was inconsistent and unclear. Eloise, for her part, showed limited cognitive ability and clear signs of profound psychological trauma. It was through records from the local Baptist church and accounts from neighbors who lived at a distance that investigators started piecing together the macabre puzzle of the Branham lineage. Initial clues pointed to a history going back to the 1920s, when William Branham, Eloise's father, settled in that isolated area after leaving a mining community in Harland County. A key testimony came from Joseph Miller, then 83 years old, who had resided roughly 2 miles from the Branham property since 1925. He told social worker Margaret Thompson on October 5, 1981, that William was an odd man who didn't let anyone near his land. He had married a second cousin, Sally, who already had difficulties speaking clearly. After she died giving birth to one of the children around 1940, we never saw another adult woman at that house again, only young Eloise growing up. The other children, 2 boys, also never left, Miller stated. Another crucial piece came from Florence Watson, a midwife who had worked in the region since the 1930s. In her statement on October 12, 1981, she revealed, "I was called to the Branham property in 1945 to assist with a young woman's delivery. When I arrived, I saw it was Eloise, just 13 years old, pregnant and in labor. William didn't allow me to stay after the baby, a boy, was born. I tried to alert the sheriff back then, but nobody wanted to get involved with the Brahms." The investigation shifted to piecing together the timeline of births on the property. Between 1945 and 1963, Eloise apparently gave birth to 6 children, which included the 4 women found in 1981. There were no formal records of these births, and without genetic testing available at the time, confirming paternity for each was impossible. Yet, clinical evaluations and gathered testimonies pointed to a deeply disturbing reality. William Branham had not only abused his own daughter, Eloise, but his sons, Eloise's brothers, seemingly continued the incestuous cycle after his death in 1967, leading to the births of the 4 women. A false lead emerged when investigators wondered if the women were part of an isolationist religious sect, but experts on regional groups quickly dismissed this. Another theory involved possible connection to family clans producing moonshine, illegal liquor common in the area during and after Prohibition, but no solid evidence was found. A significant setback occurred with the sudden death of Martha Branham on October 29, 1981, just a month after the discovery. The elderly woman died at the county hospital from pneumonia and malnutrition complications, taking with her many answers investigators sought. By November 1981, the official investigation had settled on a primary theory. William Branham began a cycle of incestuous abuse with his daughter Eloise in the 1940s, resulting in children who then continued the bloodline cycle with their own mother and amongst themselves. The 4 women found in 1981 were the product of this complex genetic entanglement, simultaneously daughters, sisters, and cousins in a family tree that had folded in on itself. The Owsley County Prosecutor's Office faced an unprecedented legal dilemma. How could they proceed when the main witnesses and potential defendants had severe cognitive impairments or were already deceased? Furthermore, the statute of limitations for many of the suspected crimes had expired, as the initial abuses dated back to the 1940s. In an internal memo dated December 14, 1981, District Attorney Clarence Hammond wrote, "This case represents not just an unprecedented legal challenge, but also a systemic failure of our social and community institutions. While we seek to hold accountable any living perpetrators, we must acknowledge that society as a whole failed these women for decades." As the investigation continued into 1982, significant findings began to emerge from the Branham family's silent past. In January, researchers from the University of Kentucky were called to evaluate the case from a broader medical and anthropological perspective. The team, led by population genetics specialist Dr. Helen Montgomery, analyzed medical records and conducted extensive interviews with longtime area residents. A revealing document was found in the local church archives, a baptismal record book containing notes from Pastor Jonathan Williams dated 1935, where he expressed concern about the improper marriage between William Branham and his cousin Sally. The pastor had written, "I visited the Branham family today and found a worrying situation. William and Sally share maternal grandparents, and signs our ancestors would link to too much mixed blood are already noticeable in the children." In March 1982, the investigation located a diary belonging to the late midwife Florence Watson, died in 1979. Within its yellowed pages were detailed accounts of births she attended at the Branham property between 1945 and 1963. A particularly disturbing entry from August 1951 read, "Called again to the Branham house. Little Eloise, now 19, has had her third child. The baby has the same distant eyes as the others. No man besides William and his sons lives on that property. May God have mercy on those children." The diary revealed Florence had documented 6 of Eloise's births, 1945, 1947, 1951, 1954, 1958, and 1963. The 4 women found corresponded to the births of Agnes, 1951, Mary, 1954, Louise, 1958, and Catherine, 1963. There was no recent mention of the first 2 children. A particularly impactful revelation came from cranial radiographs and detailed physical exams of the 4 sisters. Dr. Samuel Pierce, a genetic disorders specialist from the University Hospital, observed, "The patterns of bone, facial, and neurological anomalies in all 4 women are consistent with the accumulation of deleterious recessive genes over multiple generations of inbreeding. Especially notable are the symmetrical craniofacial malformations present in all, suggesting a very close common ancestor." In April 1982, an accidental discovery shed new light. During road repairs near the Branham property, workers found bone remains in a swampy area. Forensic analysis in June 1982 identified them as belonging to 2 children, approximately 2 and 5 years old, buried at least 30 years prior. While impossible to confirm their identity without genetic tests, which would only be available years later, the location and timeline matched Eloise's first 2 children, who were never accounted for. Perhaps the most disturbing revelation came from a late testimony by Harriet Comelms, a social worker who had briefly visited the property in 1967 after an anonymous complaint. In her July 1982 statement, she reported, "I arrived and was greeted by Martha, who prevented me from entering. I glimpsed inside through the partly open door. I saw several people sitting on the floor, including young women and at least 2 adult men. What struck me was that they were all rocking back and forth in the same rhythm, as if in a trance. Martha said they were praying in their way and I should respect their beliefs." Comelms admitted she did not insist on inspection or formally record the incident due to local pressure not to interfere in mountain matters. Her belated account highlighted how cultural isolation and institutional neglect had let the abuse cycle continue for decades. In August 1982, investigators found a former postal worker who delivered mail in the area from 1960 to 1975. He reported that William Branham regularly received correspondence from a state institution in Frankfort, likely related to social or agricultural benefits. This indicated that, despite their isolation, the family maintained minimal contact with government agencies, which nevertheless never conducted follow-up visits. A crucial piece of evidence emerged in September 1982 when Dr. Montgomery's team analyzed old community photos and identified Eloise in a 1940 school picture, her only appearance in official records. The 8-year-old girl already showed subtle physical signs compatible with first-degree consanguinity, suggesting the incestuous cycle might have begun even before her, possibly with her own parents. Throughout these investigation months, the 4 sisters remained in a state institution for people with cognitive disabilities, receiving proper medical care and basic education for the first time. Institution reports noted modest but significant progress. After 6 months, Agnes and Mary could communicate with simple phrases and learned basic self-care. Louise and Catherine, the youngest, showed greater adaptability and learning capacity. Leave in the comments, never give up on the truth if you believe all missing persons deserve to be found. By the end of 1982, after over a year of intensive investigation, Kentucky authorities had finally established what became known as the Branham case, one of the most extreme documented examples of family isolation and continuous inbreeding in the United States. The story that unfolded was more complex and disturbing than initially assumed. William Branham, born in 1902, grew up in an isolated Appalachian mining community where cousin marriages were relatively common due to geographical and cultural isolation. In 1920, he married his second cousin, Sally Jenkins, with whom he had 3 children, Eloise, born in 1932, Jacob, born in 1934, and Caleb, born in 1936. After Sally died during the birth of a stillborn fourth child in 1938, William further isolated the family by moving to a remote Owsley County property. It was there, investigators determined, that he initiated a cycle of incestuous abuse with his daughter Eloise, resulting in her first child's birth in 1945 when she was just 13. From there, the horror multiplied. Both William and his sons, Jacob and Caleb, maintained incestuous relationships with Eloise, creating a complex genetic web where subsequent children were simultaneously siblings, half-siblings, and cousins. Martha, William's mother-in-law, Sally's mother, remained on the property throughout, apparently accepting or powerless to stop the events. Final legal documents compiled in December 1982 established this timeline and genealogy. 1945, birth of Eloise's first child, a boy, paternity attributed to William, her father. The child died at age 2 and was buried on the property. 1947, birth of second child, paternity uncertain between William and Jacob, Eloise's father or brother. This child also died in early childhood. 1951, birth of Agnes, paternity attributed to Caleb, Eloise's brother. 1954, birth of Mary, paternity attributed to Jacob, Eloise's brother. 1958, birth of Louise, paternity possibly attributed to the son born in 1945, Eloise's son-brother, before his death. 1963, birth of Catherine, paternity attributed to William, shortly before his death. The genetic implications were profound. Dr. Samuel Pierce explained in his final report, this case represents an extreme example of multigenerational consanguinity where the coefficient of inbreeding reached levels rarely documented in modern medical literature. The phenotypic manifestations observed in the 4 surviving women are consistent with the homozygous expression of multiple deleterious recessive genes. Medically, the 4 sisters presented a constellation of rare genetic conditions, including moderate microcephaly, characteristic craniofacial deformities, moderate to severe intellectual disability, skeletal anomalies, particularly in the extremities, congenital heart problems, in 3, partial hearing loss, and neurological disorders manifesting as repetitive movements and communication difficulties. The legal resolution was complicated. William Branham had died in 1967. Jacob and Caleb, who would have been 46 to 48 in 1982, were never located and were suspected to have died or left the region years prior. Eloise, aged 50 in 1982, was assessed as severely cognitively impaired and unable to stand trial legally. On February 14, 1983, Judge Howard Thornton issued the final decision. Eloise Branham was declared legally incompetent and committed to a state institution for long-term care. No formal criminal charges were filed due to the death of the main perpetrators and Eloise's mental state. The 4 sisters, Agnes, Mary, Louise, and Catherine, became wards of the state of Kentucky, remaining in specialized institutions. The case's impact was profound. In March 1983, the Kentucky Department of Social Services instituted new protocols for regular visits to isolated properties, especially in mountainous regions. State legislation was revised to strengthen child protection and abuse prevention mechanisms. For the small community of Owsley County, the case was a turning point. The silence that had allowed decades of horror was broken. An April 1983 editorial in the local Owsley County News stated, "For too long, we averted our eyes behind notions of family privacy and mountain autonomy." The Branham case teaches a painful lesson about the price of silence and collective indifference. Subsequent developments revealed the lasting impact of extreme inbreeding. Throughout the 1980s, the 4 sisters received medical treatments and special education. Agnes, the oldest, never developed complete speech but learned basic sign communication and could perform simple supervised tasks. She died in 1997 from cardiac complications at age 46. Mary showed greater adaptability, learning to read simple words and demonstrating notable artistic skill. Her drawings, often of 4 female figures holding hands, were preserved. She died in 2001 at age 47 from a respiratory infection. Louise, considered the most resilient, eventually worked on supervised tasks in the institution's laundry and formed basic social relationships. She died in 2008 at age 50. Catherine, the youngest, showed the most cognitive gains with adequate stimulation. In 1990, she moved to a supervised group home where she lived until her death in 2012 at age 49. The old Branham property was taken by the state for unpaid taxes. The dilapidated structure was demolished in 1990, and the area returned to nature. Today, few locals can pinpoint the exact location. In 2002, a discreet memorial was placed in the county cemetery dedicated to the Branham sisters and all silent victims of isolation and neglect. The plaque bears only 4 names: Agnes, Mary, Louise, and Catherine, a silent testament to lives that nearly went unnoticed. The legacy of the Branham case endures as a somber reminder of the dangers of extreme isolation and institutional neglect. It became a case study in social service and medical colleges, illustrating the devastating effects of prolonged inbreeding and the critical importance of social protection systems. In a 2010 retrospective report, the Kentucky Department of Health and Human Services Commissioner wrote, "The Branham case represents a systemic failure that transcends specific individuals or departments. It was a failure of an entire society to recognize and protect its most vulnerable members. The lessons learned continue to shape our policies today." Beyond medicine and law, the case raises deep questions about community, collective responsibility, and the complicit silence that allows horror to flourish in the shadows. As Dr. Helen Montgomery noted, the tragedy of the Branham sisters resulted not only from horrible acts by individuals but also from countless omissions by neighbors, officials, and institutions that chose not to see what was before them. Today, the case remains one of the most extreme examples of inbreeding in American medical history, notable for both the degree of genetic proximity and the duration of the incestuous cycle over generations. The physical and cognitive characteristics of the 4 sisters provided rare insights into the cumulative effects of severe endogamy in humans. The most inbred women of Kentucky, as they were later called, never knew the impact their existence would have on medicine, child protection laws, and public awareness. They lived and died in a limited world, first confined by the walls of a windowless house, and later by the gentler confines of institutions that finally offered them care. If you've made it this far, it's because you care about cases that mark families forever. Leave a comment saying, "I watched to the end so we can get to know you and see who truly cares about the search for truth." Don't forget to like this video and share it with those interested in real cases that make us reflect on the limits of the human condition.